Hello, dear participants. We are glad to have you in class today. It's a good thing that you've made out time to be part of this lecture. Thank you for making out time to be here. At the end of this class, you should be able to clearly define figures of speech. I mean, to anyone who cares to know, you should be able to give them clear terms of what figures of speech are. List various types of figures of speech and then cite examples of figures of speech. These are things that you should be able to do at the end of this class. Then we need to start up with our definition. What are figures of speech? They are merely, simply put, imaginative tools. They are imaginative tools that are used both in literature and ordinary day communication. They serve three main elements. Fourth, clarity and beauty. Figures of speech are non-figurative languages which are very different from figurative languages. We now move on to discuss metaphor. When we discuss metaphor, we are looking at comparison of two different phenomena which share some common points. In metaphor, what we do is to compare two different phenomena which share some common points. Of course, the word metaphor is a Greek word which meant to carry. It makes reference to a thing as being another thing that is not literally related to it. So what you see in metaphor is somehow a connection, saying a being is another thing of which ideally such being is not. It's a shift, a way of carrying over a word from its normal use to a new one. For instance, in business, of course, including agribusiness, you hear people say the customer is the king. Now, if you are not used to such metaphoric expressions, you may be asking, is it that customers go through coronation? But what it implies is simply a way of saying that the customer exercises influence, the customer is important, the customer has power, and so on, trying to allocate the attributes of a king to a customer. Here, the things compared are completely different since they do not have any related physical characteristics. So we expect you to also, on your own, develop other examples, metaphoric expressions. We move to simile. Now, recall that in metaphor, we said there is comparison between two things, two ideas. Possibly, I forgot to say earlier on that metaphor is a condensed simile. The word simile is derived from the Latin word simile, meaning resemblance and likeness. So, like metaphor, simile also goes into resemblance and likeness, comparing two objects with some similarities. But unlike metaphor, which compares two things differently, a simile compares two different things by employing the use of like or as. So in metaphoric statements, you don't see like, you don't see as. But when we use similar, we bring in words like, or as. A similar can be used to explicitly depict the characteristics or features of a target, and then with the aim of drawing a relationship between the two of them. Example will include when you say his feet are as big as boats. Here, feet and boats are being compared even though they are not related. Now, having discussed metaphoric statements similar, we're going to move into the next aspect, which has to do with rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions. Now, when we say a question is rhetorical, what are the implications? We are saying that these questions are asked not to gain information. The one who is asking you a rhetorical question is not asking you these questions to gain fresh information. No. In rhetorical questions, the one who is asking the question is asking the question to assert more emphatically the obvious answer to what is asked. Rhetorical questions don't expect a response. The sender here, recall the SMCR model of communication, where we have the source, the message, the channel, and the receiver. Now, in rhetorical questions, the source is not expecting any response from the receiver. The source is merely asking the question to place more emphasis. So no answer is expected by the sender. Rather, when a speaker is addressing the audience, he may use rhetorical question to challenge the audience and then prompt action. So these are the things that rhetorical question as a figure of speech would always be used in speaking to the audience in various forms of communication. Having said that, let's consider another figure of speech. Here, we want to look at imagery. We want to look at imagery. What is involved here? In discussing imagery, we are looking at the application of vivid description, which is rich in sensory words, in order to create a mental picture in the mind of the reader. So in imagery, the speaker aims at creating, the communicator aims at creating a vivid image in the mind of the receiver. What imagery does is that it enables the speakers to achieve emotive descriptive effects. I hope this is very clear to us. It brings this descriptive effect that is emotional to the listener, to the receiver. The use of imagery would involve one or all of the five organs, five senses, please. All or the five senses that we have. I think that would include the senses of hearing, taste, touch, smell, sight. It can also refer to the pictures which are perceived with our mind's eye, which are perceived with our ears, with our nose, with our tongues. Here, an author uses a word or phrase to stimulate your memory, and then those senses will now help to create a mental picture of what the author wants to communicate to the listener. From imagery, we will be taking idioms and hyperboles. But let's take idioms first. We'll be taking idioms and hyperbole, but first we go for idioms. Here, we are looking at the expression which transmits something different from the literal meaning. Example, when you hear people say to get long in the tooth, that is to grow old. It's an idiomatic expression. Sometimes you hear people say he has kicked the bucket, a way of saying he's dead. That's an idiomatic expression. For hyperbole, In hyperbolic expressions, there is an intentional exaggeration of things. So this particular figure of speech aims at exaggerating the issue being communicated in such a manner that it looks bigger than ideal. Example is when we say it rained cats and dogs. When such statements are made, they are hyperbolic statements because they try to exaggerate the situation and create a larger image, a larger picture of the reality. We recall also that symbols have been used in communication over generations. Now, these symbols also can come into expressions, especially into figurative expressions. So when symbols are brought in, we will be discussing the next part of figurative expression, which is symbolism. Just as we said earlier, authors would use symbols, use objects or reference to objects to add deeper meaning to their communication. When authors do this, they are doing what we call symbolism. As a figure of speech, symbolism in literature can be subtle or obvious. It can be sparingly or heavy-handedly. An author may, on his own, decide to use symbolism in a subtle or obvious manner, or use it sparingly or heavy-handedly. In using symbolism, an author may repeatedly use the object to convey deeper meaning, or may use various variations of the same object to create an overreaching mood or feeling. Symbolism is often used to support a literal theme in a subtle manner. Class, a symbol is a character. A symbol is an action. A symbol is a setting or an object representing something else. Now, symbolism differs from one community to another. That is why we want to emphasize at this point on the need for context. If you are not within the context of the sender, if you don't share the same sphere of understanding with the communicator, you may misinterpret the symbols. Now, most times we know certain symbols will represent certain things to people. Here in Africa, when a vehicle has a fresh palm front in front, it simply either means it's carrying a corpse or is signifying peace, maybe in the cause of crisis, in the cause of riot. We also know that the dove is also a symbol of peace. So you will need to be within the context of the user to understand symbolism effectively. I hope that is clearly understood. We want to now look at another idea that is also very important. That is the concept of repetition. Repetition. Repetition is also another figure of speech that good communicators will always use to, spice up their communication. Now, speakers will employ repetition just for the sake of creating effect. The aim is not to bore the audience. No, it's far from that. The core reason why speakers involve themselves in repetition is not because they lack new ideas or they lack what to say. No, it's just to create a communicative effect. Sometimes it can be used to gather communication momentum, strengthen a communication structure. So you see speakers in a bid to gather that momentum, they go into repetition. Repetition also brings a bright idea in the next stanza. especially in hymns, in other poems and other communication approaches where we have stanzas and verses. Repetition brings a bright idea in the next stanza of communication. Through repetition, communicators stir the emotions of the audience, make them desire for more, make them hungry for the next input from the communicator. An example of repetition would be seen in the common uh, saying, Father Francis fried 5 fresh fishes for 5 fathers from France. You can see the consonants being repeated constantly. Father Francis fried 5 fresh fishes for 5 fathers from France. Then you can also listen to something like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Now, here you will see repetitions, certain consonants are repeated as the discussion go on. Let's discuss personification. Personification shouldn't be strange to us. It shouldn't be strange to us, class, because most of us must have done literal studies in the secondary school level before coming here, and even at the level of your use of English you must have also come across this. So let's discuss personification. In personification, human qualities, human feelings, actions, or characteristics are assigned to inanimate objects. So the speaker, the communicator here, try to address inanimate objects as though they are living. You may hear people say, the building stared at me with looming eyes. We know very well that the building does not have eyes. We know, even though we have so many designs of buildings, and then engineers can do a whole lot in terms of design to make whatever they desire out of the building, make it look like a human being, fix it eyes. But even if they successfully design a building and fix up eyes there, class, we know that the eyes cannot stare. So when someone says the building, the house stared at me with looming eyes, that's a figurative expression. It is so because the verb stared is a human action. A house is a non-living object, and hence it cannot stare at someone. Want to again thank you for your time, for being part of this session. We will encourage you to make out time to listen to your notes, of course, to also add more knowledge. That's the main reason why you are in class. Thank you for your time. In the next class, we'll be discussing finding meaning in figurative expressions. We want to discuss how do one find meaning in figurative expressions. Thank you.